I've been doing a lot more thinking, and really what's more important to me is that end goal. The end goal is to have that solid cash flow in place, because that then enables me to reach fire and do what I want to do with my career and with my life as well. So it doesn't matter what the means is or what the vehicle is to get there. It's more how to get there versus, say, holding a set number of property. I only suggested property because that was what I had originally envisaged when I started the property journey, which was you build X number of properties in your portfolio and then you consolidate, you pay them down, and then you've got consistent cash flow afterwards.
The Aussie Fire podcast is a collaboration between Strong Money Australia and Pearler, Australia's favourite boring long-term investing platform. Join our hosts, Dave from Strong Money Australia and Hayden from Pearler, as they discuss all things financial independence. At Aussie Fire, we're big fans of sharing experiences and talking about money. However, please note that any advice is general and does not consider your financial situation, needs, or objectives. Consider whether it's appropriate for you, and if in doubt, speak to a licensed financial advisor. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Aussie Fire Pod. We've got a really exciting episode for everyone today. It's another case study, and we're actually joined by one of our listeners who we'll introduce in a moment, who's going to share a little bit about their background and story and have a little bit of a discussion with Dave and myself. If you've been tuning into these case study episodes for a while, you might be familiar with some of the disclaimers that we've started to do at the beginning of them, which is just important because we are talking to literal people about their literal circumstances. So it's important for both our listener who's joined us today, Andy, as well as our listeners who are tuning in to understand that everything we discuss in this podcast is done so under a general advice license. And what that means is that everything we share and say doesn't take into account people's personal circumstances, situations, or needs, and we will be providing answers in a general way where possible. The short story is, whilst we might have a 10-minute conversation with someone on this podcast, or you might be listening to it, at the end of the day, we know nearly nothing about yourself or your circumstances, and therefore it's really important to consult a trusted professional such as a financial advisor or equivalent if you are ever going to be making large financial decisions with your life. But regardless, we'll try and contribute best where we can. And to start that, let's introduce Andy. Hey Andy, how are you going?
Hey Hayden, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me here today.
It's all good. Lovely to have you here. I think we'll just jump straight in. Do you just want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, your circumstances, or anything else like that before we have a little chat about how everything's going in the financial life of Andy these days?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm 34 years old, single, been in Australia all my life. My investment journey has been probably started around COVID when everyone was stuck at home, got a bit curious about investing. And over the course of, say, the last 4 or 5 years, I went down the property route, which is what many Australians do. And I've got to say I've been quite lucky with that. So been doing that, and I'm at a bit of a crossroads at the moment in terms of what I do next in terms of continuing with my FIRE journey. So a bit of detail in terms of where I'm at with that particular property investing journey. So I've got 3 properties. All of them are in Queensland. They've done exceptionally well. I had the help of a buyer's agent support me in that as well over the last couple of years. So from a pure numbers perspective, the loan amount that I have is about 1.5 million. Total portfolio value as of today is about 2.3. So overall equity of about 770. What I've calculated is after tax, if I were to cash out today, after tax, after CGT and whatnot, and after agents fees, the net equity after all those costs would be about 630 thereabouts. In addition to that, I've been dabbling with ETFs and Pearler a little bit as well. So overall portfolio value of about 35K. So quite small, with a mix of 30%. So about 1/3 VAS, 2/3 VGS. Where I'm at the moment is I've been saving quite a fair bit. So my lifestyle is fairly frugal. So I've saved a fair bit in terms of savings, if I rounded up about 200K in savings. And what I want to do next is I want to decide, well, do I continue on the property journey where I get great leverage and can continue to ride that wave? Or do I look at putting that towards growing a share portfolio as well? And one of the reasons why I moved into property was because you get really good leverage. So I'm putting some money aside to control a much larger value, and I'm seeing that pay off over the long term. But as I start looking at cash flow as well, so I am negatively geared. So before tax, my cash flow is about 20K, it's minus 20K. per annum. After tax ends up being about 11K thereabouts that I'm out of pocket by. And if I were to pick up another property, it guaranteed it would be negatively geared, so that would add to that negative cash flow. But I'm kind of just working on, well, do I continue on that journey and kind of just live with it for a little bit longer and ride that wave, or do I then look at, well, how do I diversify and move towards an ETF portfolio?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting situation, I would say. You're probably not the only person who's probably had a similar journey, started investing around COVID or got interested in investing since COVID and took advantage of potentially those very low interest rates to then borrow and use leverage to get the benefits of doing that, and would have seen in most states some pretty decent growth over the last 5 years or so as we chat today. So hopefully this case study will actually be interesting and apply to many other people who are listening. But if we look at your specific situation, the way to kind of determine what's gonna be the right move is based on a lot of different factors. So you could potentially, I was going to say double down, but it's more like quadrupling down if you were to buy a fourth property, and that could potentially pay off. But I suppose I would like to know where you're trying to get to in what sort of a time frame, because the time frame itself and what you're specifically trying to achieve, whether it's a certain net worth goal by a certain date or it's a certain amount of passive income or something like that, and how you see your kind of lifestyle potentially, or your goals over the next 5 or 10 years, because that can potentially help you decide which angle or which avenue might be the best one to go down.
Yeah. If I look at my end goal, I'd like to retire early, of course, and I've calculated what I really want is 100K in passive income per annum. Happy to live off that. So if I look at a share portfolio, I think you need about it's 1.5, 1.6 million with a 7% return to get anywhere like that. So I'd say I'd want to achieve that 100K passive income in the next 10 years. I'm 34 now, so say about 45, being able to reach that. That then allows me to work in an industry that I really want to, so being able to consult to a charity, for example, which I know that will bring a bit of an income hit as well. But that's ultimately where I want to go to. It's not completely retire from work, but being able to work for a charity, for a charitable cause, that's where I'd like to take my life towards in the future.
And so is that 100K goal, the idea behind that is so that at that point you wouldn't have to work at all? I know you're potentially wanting to move to lower paid work, but would the idea be to have this bucket of money cover all your expenses, so then the work is a bonus at that point?
Yeah, that's completely right. That 100K would cover most of my lifestyle, and then anything that I get on top of that would be a real bonus.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, with a 10-year time frame, that is a fairly decent time frame to work with. So to the point where leverage can make sense. You've already got quite a bit of leverage already, so it could potentially work out in your favor. Just to circle back on the goal itself, like the 100K per annum, it's a nice juicy round number to work towards, but you're probably going to need more like 2.5 million rather than 1.7 or whatever, because that 7% returns, you're not going to get 7% cash flow, like net cash flow from those investments. You'll get that sort of a return potentially each year, but I'm assuming you could technically try and cash out all of that return, but then that doesn't leave growth for like inflation and stuff over time. So it becomes less sustainable essentially. So the goal is, I suppose, more like 2.5 million net. And so if we look at where you are now, which was, I think you said around 770
in equity,
of equity in the properties. Yeah. And then there was 200-ish of cash. Is that right? So we're approaching like 1 million already. And how do you see super as well? Is that part of it, or is there no super involved? Or
super is on top of that. So my current super balance, I think, is if I round it up, about 180.
Yeah. Okay. So you're doing pretty good, man. You're in a really good spot for someone in their early mid 30s.
Yeah, I must say though, it's been a lot of sacrifice as well though. So things like, my lifestyle hasn't changed all that much over the years. Maybe I might buy the branded stuff here and there, like the branded baked beans versus the no frills one. And things like living at home for longer as well. So I do plan on moving out. I do plan on having my own place in the future and whatnot. But for the time being, to get to where I am at the moment, that has required a fair bit of sacrifice. And that is living at home for longer, not buying that nice flashy car that I may have wanted. But I'd say I've got the end goal in mind.
Hayden, I saw you smile when he said about the premium baked beans. Do you want to jump? You have a comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually think what's really nice about talking to people like yourself, Andy, is that there's so many Australians out there that have just put themselves in such a great situation. I think it's really exciting to talk to you because, you've clearly made a lot of sacrifices and put a lot of effort in, and now you're kind of just having these conversations about A or B, good versus better kind of thing. So I think that's always really important to acknowledge up front, just how useful a situation you've gotten yourself into is. I know we were going to talk about the kind of shares v property thing as kind of the main crux of it. But before we go any further, I just wanted to check, is there any other kind of big kind of brewing existential concerns you have with money at the moment besides the kind of like, what should I be doing with this shares v property?
As in like existential in terms of lifestyle? Or?
Oh, in terms of like, you ever worried that, maybe $100,000 won't be enough, or you ever worried that like you might get too tired on the journey, or do you feel like you're pretty well set on what the plan is, how much you want? It's really at this point just a question of like, what do you need to do to get there?
Yeah, I think if I look at the day-to-day, it's probably managing my energy levels. So my main source of income is my corporate job. So I work in an office and have all my life, and year on year, yes, there is a bit of a jump, but it's not really that much. I mean, it's less than CPI. So for me, it's really managing my energy levels and preventing burnout. So yes, whilst I do have a financial goal in mind for the next 10 years, currently it's managing the day-to-day. It's managing my energy levels at the office and ensuring that I'm staying on top of my own health, but also my finances as well. So I'd say, to answer your question, Hayden, I think it's for anyone who's on this journey, for many people, their main source of income would be their careers and their day jobs. And I would encourage people to really think about, well, is it where they want to be? Are they learning? Are they growing themselves? Because it's your skills, you're your biggest investment. And I really believe in continuous learning to grow yourself in your earning capacity as well, but whilst being mindful of managing burnout and your energy levels.
Yeah, sure. I think that makes a huge amount of sense. Probably my only question before we move on to the ETFs versus property thing is like, you talk about managing your energy levels. Like, for our listeners, what are some things you do to manage your energy levels? Like, do you have any kind of tips for people who are feeling maybe a bit fatigued by their FIRE journey?
Yeah.
Hayden wants your morning routine. That's what he's asking.
Funny enough, I do have a morning routine. So usually out of bed by about like 5:30, 5:45 at a stretch, then off to the gym for a solid hour. And a good way to really manage your stress, well, at least for me anyway, is weightlifting. So if you had a really crappy day at work or a crappy week, the best outlet for me is actually the gym. So lifting heavy, hitting some goals at the gym, and then you start your day right that way. But from a work level, it's also having clear boundaries for yourself as well. So being very clear in terms of where's work and where's personal. I know that for a lot of people in corporate, your corporate and your personal lives get intertwined so easily. So you're working long hours and before you know it, like, you're not making contact with your friends. You're spending more time with your colleagues than you are with your mates. So I've made a conscious decision this year, and also going into the new year, is really being able to shut off after work hours. So after, say, 5:30 or 6, that's it. That's the end. Work will still be here the next day, because the worst thing that you could do to yourself is burn out. Because once you've burnt out, it's going to take you so long to actually recover. Because I've done it before. Earlier in my career, I was just super eager, work crazy hours till like 11 p.m, midnight, very regularly. And I ended up burning out. I actually had an infection that I couldn't fight off, so I ended up in hospital. So I've learned from that. Don't want to repeat that at all. And for anyone out there who is on a similar journey, you've got to look after yourself. You should put yourself first.
I love that advice. I love the idea of like people who burn themselves out come from the place of trying to work a lot and achieve a lot. But the idea of, you got to look at achieving a lot, not just on a 1 month or a 12-month time frame, but on like a multi-year time frame, right? Because it's like burning out is a great way to not achieve what you want. So I think that's a great little insight. Are you happy to jump into some questions about shares and property and ETF? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, cool. I know Dave's got a few things he wants to
Is this where I come
share on this, but I might just ask a real pointed question. In as few words as possible, if you had to pick right now between, investing in ETFs or going down the investment property route, which one would you pick and why? Why would you do it? And see if you can explain that in just 5 words max.
Yeah. So it depends on everyone. So if you're new, it would be different. For me, I've already been invested for about 5 years or so. So in a couple of words, I'm leaning towards buying another property, so growing the portfolio to 4. And if I really summarize it, it's leverage. But there is a massive but. It is cash flow that I've got to manage as well. So if I just unpack that a little bit more, it's, yes, I'll be fine. Like I won't, I can still manage my finances pretty well. So I'm not going to go bankrupt. But by the same token, I'm still keen to diversify and see what else I can do with my money.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense.
So if we pick at that thread a little bit, if you were to buy a 4th property and let's say the negative cash flow kind of blew out to more like 30K per year, are you still able to save after that, or would that be starting to cut it a little bit tight? Like, I'm just trying to gauge your cash flow.
Yeah, I wouldn't be saving a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
So I calculated that if I were to take on a 4th property and leverage the equity that I have today to get into the 4th one, in terms of my net savings, it'd be cutting it extremely fine. I'll probably be saving by about 30% of my income. Currently, I'm saving a solid 60%.
Okay, so 30%, I mean, if you make 60 grand a year, that's maybe not going to be, all that much. But if you're making like in the 6-figure range, then that's still kind of a decent amount to work with in terms of surplus cash. Because I suppose where I'm going with that is it might not necessarily be a case of either or. It might be a case of you could buy the 4th property, but you could also still have a decent amount of cash flow each year to build that ETF portfolio on the side. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds where you're fairly maxed out on property, but you're still able to diversify and you're still able to use your savings productively, and you're able to kind of build a portfolio in the future where after 10 years of growth of stuffing surplus cash into an ETF portfolio, I can imagine it would be pretty decent. And either, I think in your question to us in your email, you said that you were wondering if you should go the property route or the ETF route, with the goal of then selling the ETFs later to pay off either one of the properties or 2 of the properties. And the goal was to kind of have a couple, like 2 or 3 paid off properties, it sounds like. Is that still the goal, or are you more interested in the overall goal of like 100K and you don't care how you get there? Or are you more attached to the idea of I want 2 or 3 properties paid off and I expect them to earn this much per year?
I'm not attached to having property like in the grand scheme of things. What my net goal is. So if I reflect back on what I had sent as part of the original email and to where I am now, I've been doing a lot more thinking, and really what's more important to me is that end goal. The end goal is to have that solid cash flow in place, because that then enables me to reach fire and do what I want to do with my career and with my life as well. So it doesn't matter what the means is or what the vehicle is to get there. It's more how to get there. Versus, say, holding a set number of property. I only suggested property because that was what I had originally envisaged when I started the property journey, which was you build X number of properties in your portfolio, and then you consolidate, you pay them down, and then you've got consistent cash flow afterwards.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose the only, like, you can have a situation where you choose property for the journey, but then at the end of the journey, even when they're paid off, they can be fairly kind of suboptimal in terms of cash flow because of all the expenses. I mean, you've owned property for 5 years now. You've probably seen that the expenses are typically more than people like to assume. And sometimes it's surprisingly horrendous in terms of like the monthly cash flow and how much gets eaten into, how much those bills eat into the rent.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, for example, this year I got my first land tax bill, and I wasn't really budgeting for that. So that was a couple of grand. But just came out of nowhere. Now that's the liability that I've got to consider every year going forward now.
Yeah. There's always more than people expect, I think. But if we look at your portfolio, I think in the email you said that the yield on the portfolio like on the current values, is somewhere around about 4%. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So that, in my mind, that would mean that if they were paid off, you could probably get something like 2.5%. If we assume that, 35-40% comfortably is absorbed by expenses.
Yeah, that's assuming at the current rent.
Yeah, at the current rent. So if we assume that kind of yields stay steady and rents grow with prices over the next 10 years, then even at the end goal of wanting 100K per year, you're going to need more than 2.5 million net. Then you're going to need more like 4 million, right, to get that 2.5% rental yield net. So then that starts to look like a horribly large goal to work towards. So that can be when people decide, okay, well, there's a few options, I suppose. You can choose to stick with those properties because you like that asset allocation for whatever reason, or you can shift to more of a share portfolio where you get dividends and there's zero expenses, and then you can also harvest a little bit of gains if you've got kind of higher growth shares in the portfolio as well, and you can get a comfortable 4%. So then that kind of reduces what you need because you're not trying to stubbornly make it work with an asset that's providing 2.5% with no real way of juicing that further. Or if you really wanted to keep with the property focused portfolio, you could opt for, I guess you would sell them, and instead of reallocating to shares, you would sell and then invest into like a higher yield property and try and get 4%-ish net, which you'd probably need like a 7% or maybe a little bit more yield from a property if you wanted to do that. So there's a few different ways you could do it, but regardless of which option you choose along the way, the current properties at the end of the journey, even paid off, are probably not going to be best suited for cash flow. Have you thought about that, the end goal in that sort of a sense?
Yeah, I've been trawling the various forums and Reddit, and there are a lot of people in similar situations. And you're right. If I look at gross value, yes, the yield is like 4%. But then if I consider all of the expenses that come with it as well, and then all of the taxes and whatnot that come with it too, my net yield is pretty low, if I'm really honest. So my end goal is I'm not wedded to these properties. I haven't even seen them in real life. So I'm not entirely wedded.
That can be a good thing.
I'm not wedded to them. So that means that to get to, if I leverage these properties as a way to get to a net equity position in the future, and then ultimately sell them down and then put them in say a share portfolio that will help me generate the income that I need, I'm very much open-minded about that. I guess the question is more around, well, as it is today and how I want to get there in the future, I'm still tossing up, is it still the best way to go about doing this? Is it buying the fourth one, or is it diversifying into ETFs? Because what's always on my mind is, and I'm fairly risk averse as a person as well. So I grew up in a fairly risk averse family, and my job itself requires a lot of consideration of various risks. I'm very cognizant that by putting all my money or all my eggs into the property basket, there's a lot of risk that comes with it as well, but also a lot of reward if it all pays out as well. So that's why I'm still at two minds in terms of, do I look at a fourth property? If it's a fourth one, it might not be in the same setup, it might be somewhere else, or it is just looking at diversifying into shares and having two on at the same time. The thing that's on my mind about shares is I won't get that leverage. So I won't be controlling a larger value asset, which will get me there faster. But to be honest, I'm okay with that, because if I look at the longer term, like, it will still get me, maybe not as fast as I might want to, but it will still get me there, get me to where I want to be, with a peace of mind in the day-to-day that I've diversified well and I have that security of diversification as well.
It's fascinating that you say about the being somewhat risk averse, because I thought you were going to follow that comment up with, so I'm not super comfortable on putting massive amounts in the share market, because that tends to be how people who are risk averse see things. Because, I mean, you can look at it from multiple angles, right? Because people who are risk averse often don't like volatility. So they'll be kind of shy of the share market, and then property will be safer. And even though there's, like over $1 million of debt attached here, and then possibly even more, like $2 million of debt, if you kind of continue down this path, that feels risk averse to a lot of people because they're like, well, it's property. I can see it. I can touch it. I trust it. I know it's stable and all the rest of it. So it's fascinating how people classify risk aversion or risk tolerance in different ways. Super interesting. Do you have any comments on that, Hayden? Because I know you probably talk to people who are similar where, especially being in Sydney, maybe they've put all their money into an expensive home and they feel completely okay with that and they're probably 7 figures in debt and then they're nervous about building a share portfolio because of the volatility, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you've unpacked in previous episodes, Dave, which is that like, you know, the idea of trying to get leveraged investment properties, particularly negatively geared ones or ones that are neutrally geared, I guess, is like, it's a good strategy in the interim till you can build up enough capital to then consider putting that in a share or ETF portfolio. I think probably one of the more interesting things I've been thinking about as you've been talking, Andy, is that, you know, you kind of say, I've got this, you know, these 3 properties. I'm wondering what I should do with the 4th. I think there's always something that's worth considering, which is like, if you're only really dealing with a quarter of your portfolio or a quarter of your decisions, sometimes it can be useful to just do something different and diversify it on principle, because then at least it's the same reason, you know, we buy 2 ETFs or we, you know, hedge things against one another, because, you know, if 3/4 of your wealth stays in property and the property market goes up, you're probably going to be pretty happy and you're probably not going to be sitting around going, oh, I wish there was like a 4th property in the market. Whereas if, you know, property kind of stagnates or you run into issues there and then ETFs go up and you went 4 out of 4 into property, you'll probably be punching yourself a little bit. I often talk about this idea of like emotional hedging sometimes. It's just like ways to like manage your own psychology. But the same would be true the other way around. Like if someone had $1.5 million in ETFs and they stumbled upon $500,000 of inheritance, I'd probably be like, maybe you should just buy an apartment with it and just like spread yourself out a bit so you don't feel like you are kind of all in on one particular thing. But that's not really a financial comment as much as that's a humanity psychology kind of comment.
Yeah.
I was thinking something similar actually, because you're essentially curious about, I mean, the 4th property would really lead to a fairly concentrated position where not only are you a little bit tight cash flow wise, where you can't invest as much into a share portfolio, but you're also then a little bit more beholden, or quite a bit more beholden, to interest rates. If they were to jack up another 2% or something, that's gonna probably cut out any sort of savings entirely and leave you just forking out for mortgage repayments, which won't be very fun. And then the other thing is, by sheer nature of the concentration, you're also basically betting your entire goal on one factor, which is going to be property price growth over the next 10 years, rather than, as Hayden said, leave the 3/4 of the portfolio in property and then take a different angle with the rest of it. And you do have a decent amount of cash flow, I think, each month to be able to take advantage of adding an ETF portfolio on the side to get the benefits of diversification, which I do think makes sense. And I suppose I can hear in your comments that you're a little bit, the only apprehension or the main apprehension against that idea is the feeling of potentially missing out on more leverage. But you already have a decent amount of leverage, right? You've already got $2 million invested or over that in the property market using $1.5 million worth of gearing, right? So that's already fairly leveraged. So it's not exactly like, to Hayden's point, that you would be missing out if the property market was to do extremely well. So I think the FOMO in that regard should be reduced somewhat in terms of missing out on leverage, unless you just really wanted to max it out completely. But that doesn't sound exactly like what you'd be comfortable with, because it could go against you, I guess, or not work out in an ideal manner.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Dave. It is a bit of FOMO, and because if I look at the people that I've been talking to in the property industry and how they've grown their portfolios and how they've grown or how they've reached FI themselves, a lot of them have like multiple properties in their portfolio, and some have got like 8, 9, 10. Like, if I do the maths, I can't sustain that. I just would not have the cash flow to sustain that at all. And so it was only, to be honest, it was only very recently when I started looking into ETFs as a more viable option, because up until like a couple of months ago, I really thought that property, and by way of leverage, was really the only way to grow my portfolio. And it's only when I do the numbers that I realize just how risky it can be, having everything in property. Because to your point, if interest rates were to go up, even by 0.25%, it goes up for all three, or if it's four, it's all four properties at the same time. And that it becomes a massive dent to my cash flow. So going back to my risk aversion, that is probably where the concern is, because the more risk you hold, if I have four properties, my risk level goes up by a lot more. So I think as we're going through the conversation today, I started off thinking, oh, maybe I'll go towards a fourth property because that's what I know. That's what I'm most comfortable with. I've got three already. But as we've had the conversation, as I start reflecting a bit more about just managing that risk, diversification, but also the overall opportunity and where I'm at with the portfolio, maybe it is looking at using my savings towards a share portfolio. Yeah, that's probably where my mind is at. Is the more I start thinking about it, the more I reflect on this. Perhaps it is a share portfolio that I'll look towards.
The only other thing I would say here is just with regards to the assumptions around returns. I find that if you speak to people in the property industry or people that only invest in property, the assumptions around returns are often like exceedingly optimistic. And although that can come to pass many times, I do find them to be a bit rosy, let's say, because when you back, like, leverage undoubtedly can juice your returns unbelievably well. And that's usually the examples that people look at and think about when they're trying to decide what to do, because those are the exciting big numbers where you're like, well, I just put my deposit down and this property can grow by 100 grand in a good year, which is like unbelievably, appealing to any sort of investor. But I suppose when you use a bit more conservative assumptions, which are a bit more realistic, like not like 7% growth per annum, which is, pretty unreasonable in the modern era as a sustainable long-term growth metric. And then you back out the negative cash flow from that. And then you back out the purchasing costs, like the stamp duty and the buyer's agent's fees and all the rest of it. And then you back out the eventual selling fees and capital gains tax to then reinvest the money elsewhere later. And then you back out the fact that there is a fairly good likelihood that you'll hit a flat market or a down market for 3, 4, 5 years at some point. Then it starts to look like a potential ugly 7-year scenario is not all that unrealistic, which is almost never factored into people's plans, or even in the realm of possibility. It seems to be like almost ignored. And even though you're working with a very good time frame, which is 10 years, I wouldn't recommend really anything less than that. It is something to keep in mind when, not to dissuade you, but when you are already massively invested in that theme already. So that's just something else I would keep in mind as well. If it just was to happen that the numbers don't work out quite as good as expected.
Yeah, 100%. You've given me a lot to think about. Yeah, I do have a question. It's probably more a psychological one. It's on Dave's point about diversification and whatnot. And I think the question that I have is, what's your mindset going into looking at diversification? So you've identified that I am already quite concentrated in property, and I'm starting to look into a new asset class, basically that being ETFs, and building a share portfolio. What's the mindset? So if you were to give advice to someone who, like myself or someone in a similar position, what advice would you give to them so that they don't lose sight of what they're trying to achieve? Because the thing with the share market is, to your point, it is very volatile, but over the long term, it's a positive gradient, generally speaking.
What do you mean exactly by the mindset around diversification?
Mindset in terms of like psychologically, like how would you get there? So to overcome, for someone who is quite risk averse and moving into a new asset class it's almost like an allergic reaction to that risk aversion. Like how would you overcome that?
Yeah, okay. Just by starting small. Just by, like, you wouldn't want to lump sum in 100 grand into a new asset class that you're not super comfortable with. So basically just starting small with monthly savings rather than big chunks, and then watching that asset as well, watching a few things. Watching that asset and watching the market movements and realizing that, okay, it's up one day, down the next day, up one day, down the next day. And then watch the news reactions as well and see how dramatically people talk about the market when it moves 2%. And you'll be like, really? Like, you eventually get used to it and then start to see things with this like a squinted eye, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be listening to these sort of stories and predictions because they tend to be nonsense. And then even play a little game with yourself where you just read the regular business news or the finance news or whatever, the world political news, and then try and guess where the market's going to go. Because a lot of people do this and then they tie themselves in knots thinking that they can figure out what's going to happen. And then almost every time the market goes the opposite direction of what they thought it was going to do. So by doing a few things like that, you'll get over the daily movements while also getting yourself comfortable with the new asset class and drip feeding money in slowly rather than a big chunk. And then you'll also see that the way people talk about the share market is overly dramatic because most of the time it just bobs up and down while gently going up over time as companies become more profitable, etc. And then you'll also be able to see through the nonsense of the news and things like that and realize that you should probably just stick to your kind of long-term plan and averaging in rather than making big bets on predictions and things like that. So that's how I would approach it. And I suppose the only other thing I would say in regards to diversification is diversification works because no one knows necessarily what the best performing asset class is going to be over the next 3, 5, or 10 years. So the downside of diversification is you'll basically never have the best performance out of, everybody you know. There'll always be people who are performing better than you, which can be a source of frustration, but you'll also never ever have the worst performance because of the nature of diversification. So you give yourself an averaging effect of performance, let's say. And the reason that's beneficial is because when you have an important goal, you reduce the variability of achieving that goal by the nature of being diversified. So you won't, rather than having the risk that you reach the goal in 4 years or 32 years, you kind of get the benefits of everything and you reach the goal kind of steadily in 10 to 15 years instead, if that makes sense as a way to think about it.
I was just going to tack onto what Dave said. Something I try and do sometimes is I actually try and Google negative news about asset classes I like, if that makes sense, or I've seen to be trustworthy, because I think it's really eye-opening just how much negative news there is about everything, if that makes sense. So like, let's say you're really into property, just type into Google News every few days, like property bubble, and you'll just get articles and articles with like pretty sound explanations. And it's very like, I find it useful because then you just kind of are like, oh, that's right. A lot of the stuff I read and hear, people are just always trying to talk about everything all the time. So that's just like a more specific example of what Dave's talking about just kind of getting exposed to the media to help deal with kind of some of the, apparent risks or concerns with things.
Yeah, no, some great tips, guys, and I really appreciate it. And that's given me a lot more confidence doing a bit more reflecting on where I want to take my my investing journey. So my end goal is clear. It's clear in terms of what I want. I think it's just that process from now until then in terms of what I do next. You've given me a lot to think about, but also given me a lot more clarity in terms of what the options are and the pros and cons for each as well. And as someone who is quite risk averse, I know that I will never have the best performing stock and all that, and I'm okay with that. I just want there to be average growth year on year. It's performing, my money's working for me to get to that end goal. And that's what I'm most comfortable with, is getting to that end goal, knowing within a set time frame. And that's what brings me a lot of interest in the FIRE community and what people are doing, and especially what you guys are doing with the podcast as well, because there's just so much to learn and there's so much that you could do within with your own investing journey. And I'm glad that we got the opportunity to have this conversation just to learn more about what else I could be doing. And I hope that other people who are listening to the podcast as well, that they get something out of this as well.
Oh, thanks, Andy. Really appreciate you coming on.
I think your goal is super achievable, by the way.
You think so?
Yeah.
Yeah, very, man.
It's been a pleasure chatting.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks very much, Andy.
Cheers.
So that's pretty much it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Hope hearing about Andy's life and musings and other things have been really helpful. And from Dave and I, we really appreciate Andy taking the time to come in. Obviously, Andy's not a paid actor. Andy's just a normal Australian who's given up part of their Friday afternoon to join us today. And you can tell just by some of the things Andy said that most of it is really just trying to also help other people on their journey. So I really appreciate that. If you'd like to join us on the pod at some point or another, you can find a link in the show notes. There is a link you can follow where you can submit a case study. And if you express that you're wanting to come onto the podcast, we will be prioritizing those case studies so that other Australians can benefit from kind of unpacking you and your circumstances. But regardless, you're more than welcome to reach out to us anytime about any other topics or questions you have. You can reach out to us on socials. Myself through Perla or Dave through Strong Money Australia, or you can email us at hello@aussiefirepod.com. Other than that, thanks for listening and we'll catch you next time.
See you guys.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Aussie Fire. For more FI inspiration, head to perla.com to browse our resources, calculators, and community insights. Perla is an authorized representative number 1281540 of Sandland Private Wealth Pty Ltd with AFSL number 337927. Knowledge is power, especially when investing. So always seek advice and/or check out the relevant disclosure document for any financial product, including the PDS and TMD before deciding. These are available from the product issuer's website. When you invest, your capital is at risk and past performance is not a reliable indicator of future investment returns.